now?
Yes, right.
Okay. Okay, so, Madam Chair, if it's all the same to you, we kind of pick up where we left off in terms of trying to get through and surfacing things. There was a Madeline asked a question that we're researching a couple of things, but we were going to get through the rest of these and kind of surface things, and then come back with the questions that or the answers that surface. Does that sound good?
Yes, where were we?
So we were, I had gone over.
The time change, right, was the last thing we talked about.
Yes, we discussed 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then item 6 is your option 2, and that's pretty self-explanatory. Item 7, Linda Drake is, well, we'll see if there are any questions. So that's the amendment to the rule of 180.14.10 on the timeline for designation. And then, is there any questions about that? Yes?
Holly?
So, and that's, what page is that, Linda?
It has its own section, it's on page 89.
89. Sorry, Holly.
That's okay.
So I'm curious, I think.
Come on up, Linda, please.
I think listening to Wendy's testimony yesterday gave me a little pause, actually, that I hadn't been having before. Just thinking about what that feels like on the ground and what, and actually she said 2 magic words. She said April and May. And we have a saying in schools where somebody will say, how you doing? And then you say, oh, it's May. And everybody knows exactly what you mean, right? Yeah. People are laughing. And so, and I think our intent and with any involvement we have with RADS is that the process is authentic and rigorous and gives us results, right? And to me that means planning. And so I'm wondering if staff really looked at what the impact this has on the ability of districts to plan and prepare for implementation, and sort of what your sense of that is. Because what I really am concerned about is, you know, this is in response to a technical issue of not being able to get the data we need. So it feels like we may be considering changing the real process that we're trying to do in response to the paperwork. And I'm wondering if there's some way to change the paperwork in response to what we're really trying to do on the ground, right? You see my concern? So what did you learn, or what's your feeling about that?
Okay, I just want to clarify that we are talking about this one that's on the exhibit. This is the one that we heard testimony on yesterday.
Yep.
And it changes the timeline for designation. So we're also considering emergency rules that change the timeline for approving the plan. Well, I think you're right. This is a technical issue. We simply don't get the data soon enough, or OSPI does not complete the data soon enough that we can designate the required action districts in January. Now, we've only had 3 cohorts of RADs. The first one was identified in January in 2011. The subsequent ones were not. They didn't meet the timeline that we have in the rules. So I think the board is in a little bit of a difficult position because we simply don't get the data to do it at the January meeting. So practically we end up doing it at the March meeting. But that does have an impact on districts that are designated. The 2 cohorts that didn't meet the deadline, they didn't have a problem. They were able to do their plan, and I didn't get any feedback that they had any trouble creating their plan. But if there ever was an issue, like the board didn't like the plan and asked questions of the district, then it could get into a crunch. I think that is true.
Dan? And then Cindy?
I want to ask Holly's question almost from a different direction.
that is, I know we don't have much of a sample, but are we clear on waiting for that data would have changed our answers? I mean, I know it's nice to have all the data, but sometimes, you know, in business, you make decisions with partial data, and I'm just wondering, you know, are we really kind of ending up with the same answer, but putting more pressure on the schools because we've delayed it? Or we really have some suggestion or some intimation that waiting on that data is actually gonna change the list of schools that get identified? And I just think that, you know, one possible solution would be to get a little bit more data to find out if that holding out for that extra data actually changes the determination.
I was talking to Andrew about the data process, and the holdup does appear to be graduation rate data. That's the last bit of data that comes into OSBI. And then OSBI has a very deliberate process that they go through, and they usually don't finalize the graduation data until January at some time. And then based on the graduation data plus other data, they have to create their priority list. And then they usually, before it becomes public, they go back and forth with districts. There's some districts get to look at it. They like to notify districts if they're on the list before it becomes public. So they go through a very deliberate process. And I frankly, I don't know if it might be possible to identify the RAD districts before the underlying data becomes public.
Cindy?
It's my understanding that it's not that the data is not, has not been generated. That in fact, by September, OSPI knows what the graduation rate is because of the cutoff date for what counts as graduation in that year. And it is the time that OSPI needs to evaluate and verify the data. And so for me, what I'm hearing is we're choosing between a group of adults at OSPI and the way that they either prioritize or do their work with regard to a very limited number of school districts versus giving those districts the maximum opportunity to put the plan together after they've been identified. And between the two, I would rather influence OSPI to change their priorities and identify sooner than to take time away from the districts that need it to actually do the plan.
Connie?
Yeah, I may be confused, on this, but here's what I'm reading. So in this motion, what is it, 7? We set March 31st as the RAD designation. And then on page 263, WAC 180-17020 designates that by April 15th of the year, the districts have to submit their plans. So that needs to get fixed, right? Because you can't have a district in 2 weeks turn around a plan of that significance. Or am I just reading the wrong things?
Andrew just communicated with me that I think there is some clarification here that about the OSPI process and what we understand it to be. That OSPI has an initial dialogue with districts that they think will be RAD districts, so that it is not a surprise to the districts when they are designated as RADs. And that process goes on before March. So that when the board actually designates the districts know already. Okay.
But I've been through this.
That they are being recommended by OSBI.
But I've been through this a couple of times now. And you can't, districts, it takes a whole lot more time than 2 weeks to turn around a plan of that significance. And the first time we ran this, we sent a plan back. So, that just doesn't sound right.
Well, the emergency rules are to change the timeline for this year for the approval of the plan. And I think that if we, and I think that we also need to change the timeline for the plan also, or consider doing that.
Holly?
So, if you think, we can't do that in this meeting, though, shouldn't we do it as a package? I mean, it's a little strange to have it hanging out there, maybe, but I guess I'm just looking at this, and Wendy's testimony yesterday, it was sort of not on my radar somehow, I just can't hold it, I'm not an expert at all this stuff, I missed stuff, and I went back and looked at what schools have to go through to make their plan and to think about this, and this is a 3-month difference, so, and I'm thinking about the level of attention and resource it takes to put together a plan like this, and it's different, there's a difference between talking with OSPI and kind of being put on notice and knowing it's coming, by pulling the trigger on starting to write that plan. So is it your sense that they are sure enough they're gonna be a RAD district, that they're already actually engaging in the work? Because 3 months this time of year is, it is so much time difference. I'm sorry for doing this to you this late in the date, it's just occurring to me.
Maybe I'm being too simplistic, but I think I was talking to Lynn, I think we maybe have 2 choices. Either leave the date as it is or move both dates, so that there's an adequate amount of time for preparation of the plan. Am I misreading that?
Well, answer that, I have another question.
And that's on page 263, 8, by April 15th. By April 15th of the year in which the district is designated a school district shall submit a required action plan to OSPI. So,
Yes.
yeah,
Yes.
please.
All right, so the emergency rules that are being proposed, there is an urgency about the emergency rules because we have Soap Lake District that is remaining a RAD district. And so they need to submit a plan for approval to us, which they do already know, and we can't do it. We can't approve their plan before July. So there is an urgency about the emergency rules. The proposed amended rules needs to be done before next year, but there isn't an urgency about it.
All right.
That was gonna be my question, do we have to do that, could we do follow-up with OSPI to figure out, is this, even if we had preliminary, and it's just the graduation data, the extended graduation data doesn't get included in that analysis, does it? Because that takes longer, because you have to figure out, are all the kids, did they show up? Are they in the system, verify that, and that process does take, is part of the reason why it takes till January to release graduation and
that's
extended graduation.
Use the 5-year extended cohort rate.
Yep. But if we're only looking at the 4-year grad rate, that doesn't matter, that piece does not matter, and they know that earlier, to Cindy's point. Okay, sorry, Cindy, and then Holly, and then Dan, sorry.
And I understand the part that we're proposing, or we're gonna vote on whether adding the emergency rule. But I think what Connie was pointing out is that the regular rule stays the same, and that's where you get that 2-week issue. And I think now what I'm hearing is that we could table the January versus March issue, and also look at 020 at the same time and fit all the pieces together with a little more, us understanding a little better. And we could do that in July, or we could even do it in September, because we're not talking about until next year.
Okay, that's what I understand. Is that what you're saying, Dan?
Well, unless I heard it wrong yesterday, just backing up to when we're talking about it, moving the date out of when the plan is, I think part of the testimony was who's available and when do you get into testing periods and things like that, so simply shifting the date out may not be a resolution as far as the school's concerned, because they're still gonna have an unavailability of the key people who have to input to the plan. So before we do anything that just says we'll shift out 2 months and just assume they're gonna go into July, I don't think is necessarily a prudent answer.
Holly?
And I think the emergency rule that we, because we've already shifted out, right? I mean, it has to shift all the way through the process, or you get that 2-week crunch that Connie's talking about. And so we're already in that for the emergency rule that we're talking about, but I think it demonstrates the impact of how you shift, and, I mean, I was right where you were, Dan, I'm looking at that and I'm thinking, okay, so that shifts it into July, and Connie did remind me that we sent a plan back. And then, so you send it back